Ladies and gentlemen, craving someone and making the effort to contact them are two entirely different processes, rooted in separate parts of human experience. Craving arises from a deeply emotional, almost instinctual place. It is a visceral reaction to something you find compelling in another person: beauty, intelligence, charisma, or a unique energy they project. This attraction can feel automatic, even overwhelming, as it taps into ancient evolutionary drives that push us toward connection. However, translating that feeling into action, actually contacting the person, requires a completely different set of skills. It demands a conscious decision to step forward, to risk vulnerability, and to expose oneself to potential rejection. Unlike the instinctual pull of craving, taking action requires self-awareness, confidence, and a willingness to accept an unpredictable outcome. For many people, this step is paralyzing. Acting on those feelings forces a confrontation with fears, doubts, and insecurities that might otherwise remain dormant. Inaction can often seem safer. When someone craves from a distance, they can hold on to the illusion of the other person as perfect and untouchable. Contacting, however, risks disrupting that illusion by exposing not only the reality of the other person, but also their own imperfections. When this distinction creates a profound internal conflict, a longing for connection weighed against the fear of imperfection and rejection. This gap between emotion and action is where many relationships fail to materialize. Craving without contact ultimately leaves both people in limbo, a place where potential is never realized. It's a reminder that while emotions might ignite desire, it's the courage to act that builds meaningful connections. Without that leap, the craving remains a fleeting fantasy and unfulfilled possibility lost in hesitation. The fear of rejection is one of the most powerful psychological barriers that prevents people from acting on their feelings. It's rooted in a deep-seated human need for acceptance and belonging, which dates back to our evolutionary history. Being rejected by others once meant isolation, a state that could threaten survival. While modern society no longer ties survival to social acceptance in the same way, the emotional impact of rejection remains profound. For many, the idea of reaching out and risking a negative response feels like an attack on their self-worth. This fear can be so overwhelming that it paralyzes people, particularly in romantic contexts. When someone admires another person, the stakes feel higher. They often idealize the other person, placing them on a pedestal, which makes the thought of rejection even more unbearable. Rejection in this scenario isn't just about losing an opportunity. It's perceived as confirmation of their deepest insecurities, proof that they aren't good enough, attractive enough, or worthy enough. Rather than risk this emotional blow, many choose to stay silent, convincing themselves it's better to avoid contact altogether. They might rationalize their inaction with thoughts like they're probably not interested or it's not the right time. But in reality, these are just excuses born from fear. This hesitation creates a cycle of inaction where the craving for connection persists but remains unfulfilled because the person is unwilling to confront their fear. Ironically, avoiding rejection also prevents any possibility of success. And the fear of rejection is a protective mechanism, but it also robs people of the chance to form meaningful connections. To overcome this barrier requires courage and a willingness to embrace uncertainty. Without this, fear dominates, leaving the potential for connection and growth unrealized. The burden of expectations can be a heavy weight, particularly for men in the context of relationships. Society often reinforces the belief that men must be fully prepared, stable, and accomplished before they are worthy of pursuing or maintaining a connection with someone they admire. They're taught to internalize the idea that they need to be providers, protectors, and sources of unwavering strength, which sets an impossibly high standard. If they feel they don't measure up to these expectations, they may hold back, not because they lack interest, but because they believe they lack worth. This pressure to appear flawless leads many to adopt a mindset of, I'll reach out when I'm ready, or I need to get my life together first. But the problem with this thinking is that it places perfection as a prerequisite for connection. Since no one ever feels entirely ready or complete, the moment to act never seems to arrive. Instead of making a move, they retreat into a cycle of self-imposed inadequacy, where their admiration for someone only deepens their sense of unpreparedness. This burden is further compounded by a fear of judgment if they do reach out and face rejection, it feels like confirmation that they're not enough, reinforcing their internal narrative of inadequacy. Rather than risk this emotional blow, they often choose silence, convincing themselves it's better to wait or avoid acting entirely. The truth, however, is that perfection is unattainable, and relationships aren't built on the basis of having everything figured out. They're built through vulnerability, effort, and growth. Holding on to the belief that one must first meet a certain ideal only leads to missed opportunities and unfulfilled connections. The willingness to embrace imperfection and take a leap despite self-doubt is the first step toward genuine connection. The allure of fantasy often keeps people from stepping into the reality of connection. And when someone craves another person but avoids making contact, they preserve the idealized version of that person in their mind. In fantasy, the person they admire is flawless, a vision of perfection untainted by the complexities of real life. This imagined version becomes a safe and comforting illusion, free from the potential disappointments or challenges that come with actual human interaction. Fantasy is appealing because it doesn't demand vulnerability or effort. It allows someone to feel the emotional rush of admiration without the risks associated with taking action. There's no fear of rejection, no chance of awkward conversations, and no need to confront their own insecurities. Instead, they can remain in a controlled space where the object of their affection remains untouchable and perfect. This can be particularly powerful for those who have been hurt in the past or who struggle with self-consciousness, as it feels easier to admire from afar than to engage in the messy, unpredictable dynamics of a real relationship. However, this reliance on fantasy is ultimately a form of avoidance. It keeps people in a passive state where their longing is never fulfilled and their connection remains a mere possibility. The idealized version of the person they admire isn't real. It's a projection of their own desires and imagination. And while this may feel safer in the short term, it prevents the possibility of discovering the depth and richness of a genuine relationship. Real relationships require stepping beyond fantasy and embracing imperfection, both in oneself and in others. They demand effort, patience, and courage. While fantasy may feel comfortable, it offers nothing compared to the fulfillment that comes from facing reality and forming an authentic connection. Courage is the bridge between desire and action, and it's essential for growth in any area of life, particularly relationships. While craving someone may happen naturally, acting on those feelings requires an active choice to face fear and uncertainty. Courage isn't about the absence of fear, it's about acknowledging the fear and stepping forward despite it. This principle is especially important in the realm of human connection, where the risks of rejection or failure are often enough to hold people back. Taking action requires vulnerability, which can feel uncomfortable and even threatening. It means putting yourself in a position where the outcome is uncertain and where you might face disappointment or criticism, and where you might face, not always being seen. Half the time, even any of that conversation. But avoiding action out of fear only ensures that nothing changes. The possibility of connection remains unrealized, and the craving becomes an unfulfilled longing. It's a safe but stagnant state that denies personal growth and the opportunity for deeper, more meaningful experiences. Courage also means accepting imperfection, not only in the person you're reaching out to, but also in yourself. Waiting until you feel fully confident or ready is often just an excuse to avoid the discomfort of taking a risk. Growth doesn't happen in moments of comfort, it happens in moments of challenge. When you step into the unknown and embrace the vulnerability that comes with it. The act of reaching out, of expressing interest, is an act of courage that signals a willingness to engage with life's uncertainties. It's a leap of faith that, regardless of the outcome, helps build resilience and self-awarenesses. Even if the outcome isn't what you hoped for, the act itself is a victory, a step toward becoming someone who is willing to face life head-on, rather than be held back by fear. Courage is the foundation for genuine connection and personal growth. The idea of reciprocity is fundamental in any healthy relationship. It's the understanding that both parties contribute equally to the dynamic, both emotionally and intellectually. If someone craves another person but never contacts them, it may signal an imbalance in this unspoken exchange. While one person may feel deeply connected and invested, the lack of reciprocation leaves them in a state of uncertainty and unfulfillment. In such a situation, it's important to recognize that the failure to act isn't a reflection of your own worth, but rather a reflection of the other person's internal struggles or inability to meet you halfway. When someone doesn't take the initiative to engage, it may be because they're unwilling or unable to give the emotional investment required for a meaningful connection. Whether it's due to their own insecurities, fear, or circumstances, this imbalance should not be taken personally. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that your value is somehow diminished because someone is not reciprocating your feelings or efforts. But the truth is, no one can be responsible for another person's inability to act. In situations like this, it becomes crucial to set boundaries for yourself. Waiting indefinitely for someone who isn't actively engaging can lead to frustration and emotional exhaustion. It's important to invest in relationships where there's mutual interest and effort. If someone isn't willing to take the steps to form a connection, it's a sign that you may need to move on and focus on opportunities where your emotional investment is returned. Ultimately, healthy relationships are built on mutual respect, effort, and emotional reciprocity. If someone is not able or willing to meet you halfway, it's important to protect your emotional well-being and not settle for a one-sided connection. Well,